Hi, everybody. I'm going to stay far away from this microphone because it's so sensitive. Good evening. I'm so glad to see you all here, and welcome to our first Aloud program of the fall season. I'm Jessica Strand, the Senior Director, I have a new title, of Public Programs and Strategic Engagement at the Library Foundation of Los Angeles. That was a mouthful, and I managed. For those not familiar with the Library Foundation of Los Angeles, we are a private nonprofit organization devoted to fundraising, advocacy, and innovative programming in support of the Los Angeles Public Library. Thank you to the Library Foundation supporters and members who are with us this evening. If you are not a member of the foundation, I hope you will consider supporting the Library Foundation to continue to see more programs like this one and to increase critical access to information, resources, and technology to help all Angelenos improve their lives and fulfill their dreams. You can support with a donation or by joining, and there you go. This is the QR code right there. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Aaron Fox Schiff, Deloitte, the Golden Globe Foundation, Steve and Judith Krantz Foundation, the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Sharon Oxborough Endowed Fund for Aloud, Peck Endowment for Cultural Programs, and of course, the individual library donors and members. We introduced a new, I'm going to do a little longer because it's the first program of the season. We introduced a new structure to Aloud last winter, one which we felt gave more room to experiment with ideas and format. We're continuing this fall with a varied slate of dynamic and exciting programming, from a conversation with Yuval Sharon to an evening of celebrated actors reading from banned books, to an afternoon in Grand Park where we will bring the Library of America's new anthology, Latino Poetry, Places We Call Home, to life with readings from renowned Latin poets and live performances from a handful of gifted Latin musicians. This is just a taste of what the season holds. To learn more about our programs this fall, please visit lfla.org/aloud. Now, for tonight's wonderful program. I first want to say that I rarely do this when I introduce anybody, but I am a big fan of this evening's author. I was dead set on having Jesmyn Ward at Aloud, and when her novel, Let Us Descend, pub last fall, it was my chance. I flooded her kind publicist's email with enthusiastic requests for weeks, months, only to disappointingly hear that she wasn't touring the West Coast. The publicist raised my spirits with an email saying that she might come west with the publication of the paperback. I marked my calendar and waited, composing a letter full of hope about the prospect of her coming to Aloud. And here we are this evening, lucky enough to have her in Los Angeles to discuss Let Us Descend. The themes Ward explores through characters and locale resonate so deeply that readers feel the pain in their bones, the discomfort in their hearts. There is no escaping the poetry of loss and sadness. The roads and pathways traveled make clear addiction, alienation, trauma, and helps us to further understand how the past can haunt your every gesture despite your attempts to escape. Let Us Descend is a harrowing historical novel where the spiritual world is ever present. Annis's journey takes her from the rice fields of the Carolinas to the slave markets of New Orleans and into the heart of a Louisiana sugar plantation where she struggles to survive in an unjust world riddled with cruelty. Ward spoke about Toni Morrison in an article she wrote for the New York Times when the author passed in August of 2019. While reading the piece, I thought to myself that she was describing Morrison brilliantly, but to me, she was also describing herself. Quote, later, as I read more of her work, I was to learn that all of her characters, each and every one who inhabited paradise or the bluest eye or the Song of Solomon, or jazz, were so meticulously rendered they seemed real and rose from the page, writhed in flesh, bolstered by bone, and walked. They lived, but they were never perfect. They were messy and hopeful and hardworking and sly and oblivious and insightful. For the time I spent in the book, and even after I turned the last page, they were with me. They were real. Jesmyn Ward has received the MacArthur Genius Grant, a Stegner Fellowship, a John and Renee Grisham Awards residency, the Strauss Living Prize, and the 2022 Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction. She is the historic winner, first woman and first Black American of 2 National Book Awards for fiction for Sing, Unburied Sing, and Salvage the Bones. She is also the author of the novel Where the Line Bleeds and the memoir Men We Reaped, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and won the Chicago Tribune Heartland Prize and the Media for a Just Society Award. She is currently a professor of creative writing at Tulane University and lives in Mississippi. Tonight, she will be in conversation with Traci Thomas, who is the creator and host of the critically acclaimed literary podcast, The Stacks. The show explores books and how they shape our culture. She's a passionate champion of reading and a deeply curious interviewer. In addition to the podcast, Traci is a monthly contributor in NPR's Here and Now, a columnist for SheReads.com, the creator of the LAist Live literary series, One for the Books. Please welcome to our stage Jesmyn Ward and Traci Thomas. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for clapping. That's so nice. Hi. How's everybody? Yeah? Good? Okay, good. We've been chatting, so we're already sort of warm. We're ready to go. So if you're feeling a little cold, shimmy up to the person next to you. Oh, hi, Aaron. My college roommate's here. Hi. He said he wasn't sure if he was coming. Hi, Jesmyn.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
She's doing a city a day for this week. So we're lucky she came to LA. All right, yeah, clap it up. Get loose. Okay, this is where I'm gonna start. I guarantee you no one else starts here. Such a horrible me thing to do. You're, one of Mississippi's great writers. But do you guys know where Jesmyn was born? California. So I'm gonna stake claim to you officially tonight as one of California's great writers. Yeah. Has anyone ever started there?
No one has ever started there, although, so funny enough, at my kid's school, I think every year when they're in 4th grade, each kid in 4th grade has to do a project on a famous Mississippian. And the year that my kid was in 4th grade, my oldest was in 4th grade, her teacher told her that, or told the whole class that they couldn't choose me because I wasn't born in Mississippi. So.
I love where your teacher's head's at.
Right.
She knows a California girl when she sees what. You were born in Berkeley.
I was.
Were you born in Alta Bates?
Yes, I was.
So was I. Do you know who delivered you?
I don't, actually. I don't.
Well, my pediatrician was Dr. Oken, and he was lovely, and he was my doctor all the way till I went to college, but he's now retired. My mom's not here to fact check that, but I'm pretty sure he delivered me. Anyways, so we have this Alta Bates connection.
That's awesome.
Okay, now to what you guys are really here for, the book. Let Us Descend. It's here in paperback. For folks who, can I just see a show of hands? How many of you have read the book? Oh, shit. So that's a good amount. We weren't sure. We were wondering last night, or earlier. For those who don't know, will you tell us a little bit about the book?
So Let Us Descend follows a young enslaved girl, she's a teenager. I never zeroed in on her actual age, but it follows this young enslaved girl from the Carolinas in the upper South down to the lower South, to the slave pens, the slave markets of New Orleans. So that's it in a nutshell. But it's not. But there's also I guess, a mystical element to the novel. There are spirits that exist that she interacts with, because I figured out pretty early on that I couldn't write a novel about an enslaved person that did not have some sort of mystical, magical, divine element to it.
Why not?
Because I felt like that not only would that be a horrible writing process for me and that I would struggle with it, but I just felt like the story itself would be horror, and I couldn't do it.
Okay, I have some questions about this supernatural. I was gonna do this later, but we're here. I feel like you do supernatural a lot. What does that do for you as a writer? Like, what does it open up for you that you can't access with this worldly stuff?
It's actually sort of funny because I think that part of the reason that the supernatural does figure so prominently in my work is because of the people, the kind of people that I write about are the kind of people who could be members of my family or members of my community, or just, people who live in my region. And I feel like incorporating the supernatural and the mystical into my work is a more honest reflection of who they are and of how they see the world and of how they move through the world. And so even, especially with Let Us Descend, I thought, well, I think that part of the reason that enslaved people were able, there were many reasons, but I think that was one of the tools of resistance for them, right? This belief that there is something beyond this horror, right? And that enabled them to survive and to resist and to thrive in spite of. And so, I don't know, I thought that it was more honest.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because especially in this book, the supernatural elements or the supernatural pieces of the book are elements of the real world. It's like there's a storm that is sort of personified, and there's water that's personified, and I think it feels different than, there are sort of ghostly pieces in the book too, but it feels different that they're all really rooted in the real world. Is that something that you think about as you craft these pieces?
Yes, particularly with this book, I thought at the very beginning, I wanted, I didn't necessarily want Annis and her mother and her grandmother to be Christians, I guess. I wanted them to, sort of have an understanding of the divine that was different, right? So at first I thought, well, maybe they should sort of pray to or interact with spirits that are based in the voodoo spiritual tradition that is popular in Benin, and because that's where Annis's grandmother is from. But then I began, as I wrote my way into the novel, it just didn't feel right. And I thought, maybe, the spirits that exist in this world should be born of this particular place, this particular time, this particular river, this particular, parcel of earth, right? This particular storm. And that just felt right in a way. And then I think that it also offered me a certain amount of freedom, as a writer, right? Because I can create this spirit and this spirit can be whoever I want it to be, right? Yeah, and there's a certain amount of freedom in that.
I want to talk about slave narratives because there's, a lot of conversation around Black joy and have we told this story enough and who gets to tell this story and why. And when you and I spoke on my show, we talked a little bit about this, and you actually mentioned a conversation I believe you had with Ta-Nehisi Coates about how he was like, there were millions of enslaved people, so there really are millions of these stories that could and should be told. And I think that my question is about fictionalizing this history. What does it open up for you to write a fictional slave narrative versus like going back and digging up a story that someone maybe doesn't know? What can you do with the fictional to your readers that maybe you can't do with a true story or wouldn't do with a true story?
Well, I think, I think it's interesting to me when I think about when I think about Let Us Descend, when I think about The Water Dancer, when I think about Underground Railroad, right? Because all of us, these books sort of came out around the same time, and all of them featured some sort of supernatural, sort of there was a magical component, right, to what was happening, and at least for me, I think that's part of the allure of creating a character and rendering that character and making that character real, because you're not bound by the rules of the world. I don't know, and I will acknowledge that that can be daunting, right? I was nervous, right, before I began trying to create these spirits and trying to figure out like what their communities would look like and what their histories would look like. But I don't know. I think I appreciate the freedom of invention and of inventing a character from nothing, I guess.
And how is historical fiction for you? Uh-oh. I didn't think that was going to be get a big reaction.
No, so I love all of my characters. I love all of the worlds that I write about, right? That's part of the joy of the writing process for me, right? That's part of the reason that I do what I do, right? But writing my first, like truly, historical, like a piece of historical fiction, writing this novel was really difficult for me because I was an English major, right? And then I studied creative writing for so many years afterwards. I didn't take many history courses as an undergrad or as a grad student. And I grew up in Mississippi. I had most of my primary education, that was in Mississippi, right? Where we definitely weren't learning any of this. Right. And so I read for 2 years, which we've talked about that, right? Like I read for 2 years before I began working on Let Us Descend, because I was so nervous. I was like, oh God, I was so worried about the details, right? And I kept getting like tripped up on the details. And then finally, I don't know, I think for me, I sort of figured out that I needed to do what I normally do, right? And what I normally do is I try to render my characters and try to make them as real and as complicated as I can, right? Yeah. Like I just try to make them live and breathe on the page as human beings. And so I think that I got to a point in the writing of the rough draft of Let Us Descend where I was just like, okay, if I get the name of the shoes wrong, or you know what I'm saying, like yeah. the food, then I'm just gonna have to deal, my bad, I'll have to apologize and I'll have to deal with it. But what is important is that this person lives on the page. These people live on the page. So That's what I tried to do, but it was really difficult. I don't know. I never say never, right?
Okay.
Because people ask me a lot about creative nonfiction, right? About my one memoir, right? They're like, you think that you'll write another one? And I get very close to saying, I don't think that I'll ever write another memoir because it's such a difficult
I don't want to hear that.
form. It's so hard.
You know I love nonfiction.
Yes, I know.
I actually need you to lie to me so I can hold on, because for those of you who haven't read Men Reaped, it is one of my absolute favorite books of all time. So I just need to believe that there is a world in which you might do it again, or like something else again. I don't know. Or maybe don't. Let that just be its own thing for me in my heart. I don't know. I'm torn.
I don't think that I try to never say never, right?
Okay.
I've gotten very close when I talk about Men Reaped, because I always talk about how difficult it was for me to write. And I mean, every book is a challenge. This book was challenging, but I can't say that I'll never write another piece of historical fiction. I might.
But maybe another time or place might be more fun.
Right.
Like maybe the 80s in New York, or like, I don't know. Like,
Right.
I feel like you could do a great Studio 54 book or something. I wonder if people were ever like, what is the historical fiction book that Jesmyn Ward would write? And they're like, obviously a Studio 54 book. Like, when I think of Jesmyn Ward, it screams Studio 54. No, I think you could do it. I'd read it.
You're giving me all kinds of ideas.
I have a lot of ideas. They're all that good, actually. What's the strangest or like most fascinating thing that you Googled when you were researching for this book?
Probably mushrooms. The mushroom
Okay,
stuff
Studio
was
54.
really
I'm on to
fascinating.
something.
It was really fascinating. I remember when I was like reading about mushrooms and the different mushrooms that one can use to, heal and poison. It blew my mind that there was this mushroom that just grows out of dead insects. It just grows from dead insects. Just dead insects.
I'm disgusted.
Isn't that amazing?
I'm amazed, but also very disgusted. Is it specific insects?
I think it is specific insects, but I can't remember the insects off the top of my head right
That's
now.
okay.
But isn't that...
It is fascinating.
It is.
I feel like I love to find out what authors have, because I know that sometimes some of you will go into rabbit holes so that maybe you don't have to write. That's my understanding. I was like, I'm sort of stuck. Let me mushroom insects go. Like, you'll spend like a month there. This is a question that I was going to ask you that I thought would be more difficult, but well, let me ask you all this. How many of you, so we know how many of you read Let Us Descend. How many of you, your first book by Jesmyn Ward was Let Us Descend? Yeah? Amazing. How many of you was your first Men We Reaped? Yeah. Sing Unburied Sing? Okay, that seems... Salvage? Where the Line Bleeds? Anybody from the beginning? Oh, okay. Old school, we love this. I was gonna ask you to sort of talk about each of the books as if they were your children.
Oh.
Because you can't say you have a favorite, but like I have 2 kids, and like one of my kids I have very romantically loving feelings towards, and my other kid I have very like, you're funny, but stop. Like the one who ran into the bathroom while I was putting my makeup on today, holding a speaker, playing Not Like Us by Kendrick Lamar, stomping on the ground, and then grabbing all my makeup brushes and putting them on his face. Like that one is funny. Like that's funny. But I don't feel like about him. So I sort of wanted to know if you would do that with your books.
No one's ever asked me to do that before.
California.
Right.
Come to the West Coast more often. I've got a lot of questions.
Let's see. It's Where the Line Bleeds.
I left out 2. I left out the anthology and then the little tiny sweet little one.
Navigate
I
Our
did.
Stars. Okay, I don't know if okay, I'll try.
Try.
Where the Line Bleeds, it was my first novel. It taught me the most important thing that it taught me was that I could write a book. I look back at it, and it is very much a first novel. I didn't know what I was doing.
Sure.
I was motivated largely by, like, I don't know, like, just this desperation to tell these stories. Just felt so important to sit with those characters in that place and to tell those stories. And I think that the twins in that book, they both have aspects of my brother, but especially the twin whose name is Joshua. Like, there's so much about his character that I took from my brother. And so I feel very tenderly, even though I know it's ugly, right? It's an ugly, messy book.
I think people really like it. I don't feel like you're giving
love
yourself
it.
enough credit.
Yeah, I love it. And then Salvage the Bones. I felt that same sense of desperation to tell that story, and sort of, again, like an overwhelming sense of love for those characters, right? I think maybe I felt not totally confident, but just a bit more sort of oriented by the time I was working on Salvage the Bones, because I was like, oh, I did it once, and I'm doing something new here, but at least I know I can do it, right? And I loved writing a dog as a main character.
Yeah.
And I loved Skeeta, even though I didn't fully understand him. I feel like I still don't fully understand him. And I don't know, I feel a tenderness for those characters too, but it's different because I think they are very much their own people, perhaps in ways that the characters in my first novel weren't. Men We Reaped, hardest book that I've ever written, right? Because it's about my brother and my friends who died, and then it's using like my life and my family's life as context to try to understand why that would happen. I say I don't have a favorite book, but I love Men We Reaped, and I think that part of the reason that I love it so much is because if there was ever a story that I was meant to tell, it was that one.
You're making me emotional.
So
Sorry.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just, if there was ever a story that I was meant to tell and that I lived through all that I lived through, and worked, all the work and just all of it, it culminated in that book.
Yeah.
Sing Unburied Sing, I love because it was the first time that I overtly incorporated mystical and supernatural elements into the fictional world that I was writing about. And so that was fun, that was exciting for me, even though, again, I was afraid.
Yeah.
But I don't know, but I enjoyed it. There was joy. I think there was a lot of joy, even though the subject matter is always very dark.
Yes,
Whenever,
yes.
and
That's
all
what
of
we
my
love.
work,
We love
right?
it. We love it.
But I enjoyed it. I loved it. Navigate Your Stars is a very small book based on a commencement speech that I gave, and I don't know. I love creative nonfiction. It's not the form that I was sort of trained in, right? But I think it teaches me a lot, and so there's a certain satisfaction I get from writing, narrative nonfiction or narrative essays.
Right.
It teaches me a lot about myself, about my family, about the people around me, and I feel like it helps me to see the world a bit clearer. Every essay I feel like helps me do that, and so I don't know. That's that's why I love Navigate Your Stars. the essay collection, I love that collection because there are so many fantastic writers
So
in it.
many.
And poets, right?
Yeah.
I have poets, isn't that incredible? I love poets. But yeah, so it's just so many fantastic, incredible writers, and to have them all in one place.
If you all have never, the book is called The Fire This Time, and if you just, I think they have it up there, because Skylight's here selling books, thank you, Skylight. You just look at the table of contents, it'll make you puke, because it's so incredible. It's like, it's a who's who of Black American writers.
It's fantastic.
It's like, how they love you, because they all said yes. I mean, it's like a testament to you that everybody was like, yeah, sure, I'll contribute an essay. So impressive.
Yeah, I feel super honored. So I love that book. And then Let Us Descend. I think, in a really interesting way, taught me things about myself and I don't know, and taught me things about myself in the same way that I feel like writing creative nonfiction teaches me things about myself.
Interesting.
And really, it was when I wrote Let Us Descend, it was the first time that I realized that, like, I was writing this book because Annis wanted me to write this book, but at the same time, I was writing this book because I needed to listen to Annis. I needed to sit with her because there were things that she was going to teach me.
Yeah.
I felt like.
Okay, when we talked about this book before, you talked about how this book, for those of you who read it and those of you who haven't, this book deals a lot with grief. This is a mother-daughter kind of grief story, and, chattel slavery is kind of a dark time, so there's a lot of dark stuff. I'm wondering how, because when we spoke, the book had not come out yet, and we talked about grief a little bit, but I'm wondering how having this, like, piece of you that deals with grief in a time in your life when you're going through grief acutely, and when we talked, you mentioned that you had stopped writing this book because the death of your partner, and that you felt like you couldn't do it, and then you went back and you're like, okay, I'm gonna do it. Like, this can't be how I go out. So I'm wondering now, a year into this book being into the world, like this thing that's so personal and tied to so much of you, how it's felt talking about it in a room full of people, like getting asked questions about it. I'm curious how it's been going.
Right. I don't know. I mean, I feel like the realization that Annis comes to at the end of the book about choosing to live, right? And how, I don't know, like, how that ties us to the people that we love, and how that is an act of resistance, and and how that is an important choice, I think, that we make throughout our lives again and again and again and again. I think that is definitely something, like, that's the lesson that she taught me, right? That's the reason why I needed to write this book now, and especially during the bulk of it, when I was, like, in that fresh first hell, right, of fresh grief. But it's difficult to talk about these things because we don't, right?
Yeah.
It's difficult to talk about grief because we don't talk about grief. We avoid talking about grief. But I do it, especially when I'm, talking about Let Us Descend, because, one of the sort of hungers, I guess, that I had in every, in every experience that I've had where I've been grieving, is that, in part, I just want to feel less alone in that experience. And I know that speaking about it, that talking about it, being honest about it, that people need that. And so I commit to doing it.
Right. Okay, this is a hard shift, but you are a writer who writes really, we talk lush, juicy sentences, scenes, like you are working on the page, like, and we can feel the effort and like, not in a bad way, but like in a delightful way of like, this person really cared enough to take the time to like craft these sentences, right? And I think of that as like sort of being like a close writer. We talk about like close readers, people who read really closely. I am not a close reader. I am sort of a vibes and a few details that pertain to my personal life that I'm interested about that I will ask you about. You know, you're from Berkeley. Oh, it's about me. But I'm lucky to be in community with a lot of readers who read closely. And one of them's here tonight. Her name is Sarah. And I was like, what should I ask Jesmyn Ward? And she sent me the most fucking brilliant question. She sent me 3, but some of them were spoilers, so I was like, Sarah, we can't do it. I outsourced my job. Sarah said, I annotated 95 colons in the book. Close reader. I'm like, what's a colon? I don't know how a colon works, okay? So I'm wondering things like why she chose this punctuation mark or how it affects the way she reads a sentence out loud. Maybe what she likes about it visually on the page. I wondered if colons were an artistic choice somehow connected to the thinning veil between worlds that Annis experiences. The colon appears so often between 2 distinct sentences, like a thin grammatical veil between these ideas. Then I said, Sarah, are there any pages that this comes up on? Page 166 to 167, 6 colon sentences. Page 228, 4 colon sentences. Page 240, 3 colon sentences. Pages 271 to 272, 5 colon sentences. Talk to us about the colon. Many of us close readers have questions. I mean, it's a fascinating question. Sarah annotates like so deeply. She did this whole thing about water between your 2 books, but we can't talk about it because it's spoilery. But talk about the colon.
It's not a visual choice.
Okay.
It is a rhythmic choice. It's all about rhythm. It's all about the rhythm of the sentences. And so, you know, she sort of clued in on the fact that often, especially when I think about language the entire time, right? I'm thinking about, you know, concrete sensory details. I'm thinking about figurative language. I'm thinking about, you know, how many metaphor, how many simile, right? Like, I'm thinking about that all the time. And I am also always thinking about rhythm, right? And I'm thinking about rhythm, and I'm thinking about pacing. I'm thinking about the ways that the sentences build on each other, the way the paragraphs build on each other, right? And the rhythm, you know, throughout all of that. And so when I get further along in the revision process, so when I get, you know, I don't know, probably to the 10th revision or something, that is when I pay particular attention to rhythm throughout, right? So when I'm working on the rough draft and something is problematic for me, it just doesn't feel right, right? Like I'm working on a passage and it's just, there's something about the rhythm that's not right. I'll read it aloud, right? As I'm drafting, and that will often help me through, right? Like that's how I find my way to what it wants to be, right? To what that passage wants to be, whatever rhythm it desires. That's how I find my way to that rhythm. And then when I'm on that 10th revision and I'm again trying to pay attention to rhythm, then again I'm reading it out loud, right? Because it has to, you know, I'm going through the whole book, I'm reading it out loud because it wants to have a certain rhythm, right? The rhythm changes throughout, but you know, each section, each paragraph, each like little succession of sentences, right? Like they want their own rhythm, and I have to read it out loud in order to find my way to it. So that's part of the reason why I use so many colons, because if this paragraph wants to, you know, wants to build and build and build and then speed up and then build, then the colons help me get there.
Do you have a favorite punctuation mark?
Probably a colon.
Colon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Not a semicolon, not not a period, definitely not a question mark or an exclamation
Okay,
point.
I'm an exclamation mark.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
feels right.
I can sort of.
I feel like this makes sense, yeah. No, I got asked that question on a panel. It was like, well, they asked the authors, like, what are all of you? And I was like, look at me. I'm a walking, talking exclamation point. Unfortunately for all of you. Okay, before we get to audience questions, and they're coming, so think of them. We got like a minute. Are you easily embarrassed?
Depends on.
This might be embarrassing?
I don't know. Sometimes
It's embarrassing in a good way.
Okay.
Have you guys heard of the New York Times? So they did a list. Do you guys hear about this list? Is this embarrassing? I thought so. Yeah. 100 best books of the 21st century so far. 3 people, a lot of people had 1 book. A lot of lovely people. Jonathan Franzen had 1 book. Great guy, I'm told. A few people had 2 books. Incredible, right? 2 books you've written that people agreed was one of the greatest. 3 people had 3 books. 3 fucking books on the list. 3. There's not really a question. I just wanted to do that for you because I feel like as the list was coming out every night at like 3 a.m. when it would come out in California, I'd wake up and like all my texts would be going off and I'd be like looking. I'm like, oh my God, Jesmyn Ward again! But the question, I guess, is sort of about lineage. Because I feel like that achievement puts you, even though you already were for many of us, in a sort of lineage with other writers. I think writing the historical fiction book puts you into a different place, like as far as the literary canon goes. Do you think about these things at all? Do you care? Is it great or is it annoying because it makes writing harder?
Both.
Both, okay.
Yeah, because I do care, right? I do care, right? I love the people that I write about. I love the worlds that I write about. I love the stories that I tell. And so I want them, first of all, I want to do it well. Right. I want to do my job well. I've dedicated my life to it. So I want to do it well. And I want people to love it, yeah. Right? And so it is important. But I do try to forget it right. because it does. It places too much pressure on you, right? It places too much pressure on you. And the first time that I experienced that was with Salvage the Bones, right? Because Where the Line Bleeds sort of flew under the radar, right? But then Salvage the Bones was nominated for the National Book Award, and then against most odds, right?
Was it nominated or did it win?
It won,
okay.
Right?
I was confused. I was like, wait, what book is this? Because I feel like it won, but I don't know what she's talking about.
It won, but it was a total underdog. No one was predicting that Salvage the Bones would win. I wasn't predicting that Salvage the Bones would win. I tell this story too. Like, nobody from my family attended the award ceremony. Because I'm like, I'm not gonna ask y'all to take off from work
right.
and to come up here with me to the National Book Awards. Right. I'm gonna lose,
right.
And you're gonna miss out on money.
Right.
So I didn't invite anybody.
Did they come the second time?
My mom did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I bet she was so mad. Like, I can't believe you told me not to come.
Right.
I would have been there.
Right.
It would have been great for me.
Right.
That's the mom that I am, at least. I would be like, how dare you not tell me?
Right.
Okay, we got to open up to audience questions. Okay. Lovely people, raise your hand. There's microphones. You get to talk into a microphone just like us. Yes? Okay, I see you down there. Yes.
Hi, Jesmyn.
Hi.
Usually when you read stories about Black mothers and slavery, there's always this undertone that there's like a lack of affection because of the fact of like you're taking care of somebody else's kids, you don't have time in your own house. And so when I read stories about slavery and Black mothers, I'm always assuming that, and the first thing that comes across in this book is that they do have like tenderness and intimacy. Were you actively trying to work against this narrative, or were you not thinking about it? And in your research, did you come across narratives that contradict this thing that we have seen so much in what we've read before?
Mm-hmm. I vaguely remember coming across a collection of slave narratives, and I think it was like 6 different slave narratives, and they were very short, all by women. And I feel like there were a couple in that collection, which I wish I could remember the name of it. It might have been 6 slave narratives, like that plain, but some of those narratives did contradict, that trope, I guess. And I feel like at the beginning of Let Us Descend, I sort of acknowledged it, right, with the woman who shares the cabin with Annis and her mother, who, I think I said she won't love what you can't keep, or something like that, right? But I don't know. I think that from the beginning there was something different. I mean, I don't know. There was, because I don't know, and maybe this is a very just modern understanding of it, but I would imagine that there were more mothers who loved their children desperately, and because they were always aware of the ever-present danger of losing them forever, right? That made that love even more, even more overbearing and even more fierce, right? And I wanted Annis's relationship with her mother to reflect that. But like I said, that may be a modern understanding of it, but I don't know. I think living with that ever-present knowledge that this little person, right, could be taken away from you, or you could be taken away from each other. I don't know. I don't know. I think that would make, yes, that affection and that, I don't know, the bond even more fierce.
Yeah, you could. Oh, that's my husband. I was purposely not calling on him.
Sorry, I was a little late because They Not Like Us was still being played when I left by that one twin. So I'm assuming you guys already sang happy birthday to Beyonce? Or no? Okay.
We didn't.
Anyways, it's so great to see you in person. Jesmyn, if you could switch roles with Traci, who would you want to interview on a podcast?
Good question.
That's a good question, but we were having a conversation about this backstage, and I told her I did this once. I did her job once, and I was terrible at it. Like I'm so stressed out. I'm so nervous about it. It terrifies me. So, but if I don't know, if I had to, who would I? I mean, she's not here anymore, but I would have loved to have had a conversation with Octavia Butler.
Good one. That's
Yeah.
hometown.
Yeah.
Really good.
I would have loved
California
to have had a
girls,
conversation
just
with
talking
her.
about writing. Good question. Who else? Okay, I faked you out. You can go next. Yeah, sorry.
You know, here we are in Blue, California, and I'm just curious as to how life is for you in Red, Mississippi. What are the dilemmas, the joys, the sorrows?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that I am always thinking about that question. One of the reasons that I decided to return to Mississippi and to attempt to live and work there as an adult was because, one, like nearly all my family is there, right? And I love them, right? I'm very lucky. I love my family, right? I have a huge extended family of over 200 people, right? Basically my community is my family, right? Because I live in this really small town. We don't even have a post office. So, you know, and I missed that. And so that is, you know, that's a beautiful, I think, aspect of living in Mississippi, of having my family, you know, my kids in Mississippi, right? And I love the place, the actual landscape of, you know, New Orleans and the areas surrounding the swamps and the bayous surrounding New Orleans, of, you know, coastal Mississippi and southern Mississippi, and then through southern Alabama and into the Florida Panhandle. I love that landscape. There's something about that landscape that speaks to me and that inspires me in the work that I do. And so I love being there, right? For that reason. But at the same time, you know, it's very hard to live your life day in and day out, knowing that 80% of the people that you are interacting with, right, in the world outside of your family and your extended family and community, don't believe in your humanity, right? Devalue your humanity. That's really difficult, right? And you know, sometimes it comes out in the things that they say and the things that they do, and sort of casual, interpersonal, you know, racism or, you know, microaggressions. And sometimes it doesn't, right? But that knowledge, it's still there. And that is very difficult. And it's a kind of stressor that I don't know if I'll be able to sustain it for the rest of my adult life, right? Like, not only that, but then you think about, you know, you think about the institutions, you think about the systems, right? And yeah, I don't know if I'll be able to handle that kind of stress for the rest of my life. I think that was one of the real pleasures. I mean, I know California is not perfect, right? But it's one of the pleasures that I discovered when I left Mississippi, when I graduated high school and came here and went to college, you know, went to university and studied in the Bay Area. There was, and I hope I'm not like feeding into stereotypes, but it was just lighter. There was a lightness that I felt in myself and in my life that I had never felt before. I just think that the weight of the history and the systems, you know, and the interpersonal, the casuals, like interpersonal racism and the I mean, it's a lot. So I don't know. I think about that often, especially as I begin to do more nonfiction reading about weathering, right? And about the effect of racism and stress on.
Did you read the one that came out last year? The Geronimus one, the like weathering. She wrote Arlene.
I haven't read that one yet.
I had to put it down, and that's a lot for me because it was like a lot, and I like a lot, and I was like, okay, I got it.
Right. I haven't read that one yet.
Yeah, but it's great. Okay, we can do 2 more if we go fast. Hi. Yeah, go ahead. We'll do Christy here, and then we'll do you. Yeah, you'll be my last. Sorry, everyone else.
So I know a lot of writers have a specific process. Isabella Allende starts a book every year on the same day. Some writers write like 8 hours a day, like it's their job, like their career. What's your process, and how do you kind of get into, you know, writing a book?
So I began to develop discipline around writing when I was a student at the University of Michigan. And so I would write, back then I sort of started small. I would write, well, that was when I was working on Where the Line Bleeds, and so I would write for at least 1 hour 5 days a week. But then I think in the summer between my first year and the second year of the program, then I put a page limit. I was like, okay, I need to work for a bit longer than that, so I want to at least try to write 5 pages a day. And I've never learned to count by words. I'm a page person.
I hate when an author tells me how many words their book is. I'm like, that's nonsense.
Right. I have
How
no
many
idea.
pages?
Right.
Like, oh, I wrote 30,000 words today. I'm like, okay, is that a book? Is that a paragraph? Like, what?
Right, I'm the exact same way. To the point where I have to, like go into my Word documents and look at the word count at the bottom and like, oh, so that's how many words that is. Anyhow, so I started by sort of writing 5 pages a day. But then once I got out of the program and, when I was working on my later novels, I sort of settled into the routine that I have now, where I work for at least 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's great when all my kids are in school, because then I'll work the whole morning, right? So at least for 4 hours, the whole morning is just dedicated to writing. And if I'm caught up in what I'm doing, like if I'm in a great place and I'm feeling it and I don't want to stop, and usually that doesn't happen until I'm like 50 pages in. Those first 50 pages are always just terrible for me, and I suffer through them. But once I get past that 50-page mark, then I begin to develop more momentum, and so I'll work for, 5 hours, right? Sometimes 6 hours. But I try to do it 5 days a week, take the weekends off. I can't write and listen to music because I have to hear the rhythm. I have friends who do write to music, and I admire them, and they can work in noisy environments too, but I can't. It has to be quiet, because I have to hear the rhythm.
You back there, take us home.
Hi, I'm a really big fan, really inspired by you. And I'm also from the South. I'm from New Orleans, actually. So reading your books for me was like huge, because I feel like I hadn't seen that much, representation in the way that you, showed the South. And I always felt like being from there gave me kind of a different way of like seeing the world and like sensing things and the supernatural. And I see that a lot in your books, even when you are just doing like metaphors and things like that. I feel like you have a really interesting way of like showing these things through like senses and tying them together. And like I can tell you see characters in the world in that like other way. So yeah, I just want to ask, how it is for you when you're coming up with these worlds and these metaphors, like what it feels like.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So whenever I am using figurative language in my work, I always try to root that figurative language in the character's experience, right? So like in the character's, I want that figurative language to reflect how this character sees the world, what they've seen in the world, their history, right? I want the figurative language to reflect the kind of connections that they would make, right, between one thing and another. So I really want the figurative language to be an expression of character. So it's something that I do, that I think about all the time, but I didn't come up with that myself. I feel like that was something that I read in one of Toni Morrison's brilliant essays, where she was talking about figurative language, and she was basically saying that it should be character-driven, right? And also in some ways, perhaps a reflection of who the writer is and where the writer comes from. And so when I read that essay, I took that lesson to heart and and so now, like, that's something, again, that I think about sort of at every step, of my creative process, right? From rough draft to first revision, second revision, third, on down the line, like from the beginning to the very end. That's one of the things that I'm thinking about.
Okay, I think we have to be done. I don't want to be. Before we're done, I just want to say two things. One is the punctuation mark. I just looked at how we're dressed. I'm obviously dressed like an exclamation point, but you're dressed like a fucking colon. Look at you. You're in black and white. Two full thoughts separated in the middle. I was like, I'm dressed like an, and then I was like, look at her. She's hiding in plain sight. The other thing I want to say is that you all can get copies of Jesmyn's books. They're selling them here, Skylight Books, independent bookstore. Please support, and obviously support the library. Hello, the greatest resource. And I see you back there. She's gonna really take you home. I have just one last question. How did Oprah smell?
Rich.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Jesmyn.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. It was an amazing conversation. I am glad you came to the West Coast, and I'm glad Traci is here to interview you. And thank you all for being here. And next Monday, we have Edwidge Danicott, who is another fantastic writer. So thank you for being here. There are books in the lobby, and please join us again. Thank you.
Thank you.